The battlefield was supposed to be a massacre, but not like this. Admiral Korvac stood frozen on the command deck of his flagship, his eyes wide as he watched the impossible unfold before him. The mighty Zoreth fleet, the strongest force in the galaxy, had just fired a full barrage at the lone Terran battleship. Every weapon they had, every ounce of destructive energy, had been unleashed in a coordinated strike. It should have been enough to vaporize a planet. Yet as the energy cleared, the Terran warship remained untouched, as if reality itself had refused to let it be harmed. The silence on the bridge was suffocating. Crew members exchanged nervous glances, their scaled hands gripping their consoles as they frantically checked their instruments. No shields detected, no counter-energy signatures, nothing. It was as if their weapons had simply ceased to exist the moment they reached the Terran vessel. The sensors told them it was real, yet their minds refused to accept it. This was not possible. Zoreth technology was superior to all. Their weapons had conquered countless worlds. Their fleets had never known defeat. And yet, here they were, facing a single enemy warship that stood completely unharmed after their strongest attack. A cold wave of fear spread across the bridge. The Admiral's jaw clenched, his mind racing for an explanation. "Scan that ship again," he barked, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. The crew obeyed, but the results were the same. The ship was there, massive and imposing, yet its hull showed no damage. No distortions, no shield fluctuations, no energy absorption. It was as if their attack had never happened. Then the Terran warship moved. It was subtle at first, a shift in position, a tilt of its angular hull. It glided forward, smooth and deliberate, without the usual propulsion flares that most ships emitted. It moved like a predator closing in for the kill. The Zoreth officers felt a collective shiver as they watched the screen, dread sinking into their bones. "Prepare for another attack," Korvac ordered, trying to regain control of the situation. "All ships, fire at will." The fleet responded instantly. Once more, thousands of plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and missile salvos shot through space, converging on the lone Terran ship. The darkness of space was momentarily lit with destruction. But then, just like before, the attacks vanished into nothing. No explosions, no impact, no effect. The bridge filled with the frantic beeping of warning alarms as the sensors failed to explain what was happening. Crew members whispered in hushed voices, their terror mounting. This wasn't a war. It was something else entirely. "It's a trick," one officer muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. It must be some kind of advanced countermeasure. But before anyone could respond, the Terran ship retaliated. A single shot, one projectile. It wasn't large, nor was it glowing with energy. It was a simple, solid round fired from what appeared to be a railgun. Compared to the destructive power of the Zoreth fleet, it seemed almost laughable. But when it struck, everything changed. The round hit one of the larger Zoreth battleships, the Vorkal, directly at its center. There was no explosion, no shockwave, no blinding light. Instead, the battleship simply split apart. From the point of impact, the ship was torn in half as if an invisible force had sliced through it with surgical precision. No debris scattered, no fires erupted. The two halves drifted away silently, as if death itself had claimed them in an instant. The Zoreth fleet watched in paralyzed horror. This wasn't just destruction, it was erasure. The Vorkal had been one of their most formidable warships, with layered armor and shielding strong enough to withstand planetary bombardment. And yet, a single shot from the Terran battleship had reduced it to nothing. The silence on the bridge deepened, broken only by the sound of crew members breathing heavily, struggling to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The fear was now palpable. For the first time in their history, the Zoreth were not the hunters. They were the prey. "Impossible," Korvac whispered, his hands tightening into fists. His mind screamed for an explanation, for anything that made sense. But there was none. The truth was clear. They were outmatched. Completely, utterly outmatched. He turned to his officers, desperation creeping into his voice. "We have to regroup. Form a defensive line. Do not let that ship advance." But even as he gave the order, a horrifying realization struck him. The Terran warship wasn't just powerful, it was intelligent. It had waited. It had let them attack first, had watched their movements, had studied them. And now, it was hunting them, one by one. As the Zorath fleet scrambled to reposition, the Terran ship fired again. Another single shot, another ship destroyed. No explosion, no lingering wreckage. Just gone. Mighty fleet of the Zorath Empire, once the terror of the galaxy, was now nothing more than a collection of targets, and the Predator was closing in. Panic spread like wildfire across the Zorath fleet as the Terran warship continued its methodical onslaught. It was not fighting like any known force in the galaxy. It did not overwhelm with numbers, nor did it unleash massive barrages of energy like the Zorath had. No, this ship was different. It was precise, calculated, deadly. Every time it fired, a ship was erased from existence. There were no massive explosions, no wreckage left behind, just a silent, terrifying disintegration. Admiral Korvac gritted his fangs, his clawed hands tightening around the command console as his fleet struggled to regroup. "Form a perimeter. Keep it surrounded," he barked, but even as he spoke, he knew the order was useless. They had the numbers, yes. Hundreds of warships surrounded the lone Terran battleship, but numbers meant nothing if they could not land a hit. Every weapon they fired vanished into nothingness, while the Terran warship returned fire with an almost lazy efficiency, picking them apart one by one. Another battleship, the XR Zun, was next. A single shot, fired with the same eerie precision, struck the vessel. A fraction of a second later, the entire ship was sliced apart like a piece of paper. No debris, no lingering energy signature, just gone. Korvac's breathing became ragged. His mind, trained through decades of war, struggled to find a pattern, an opening, anything. The Zorath had faced countless species before. They had crushed the weak, outmaneuvered the strong, and conquered without mercy. But they had never, ever faced something like this. Retreat. The word tasted like poison, but Korvac had no choice. He knew it. His crew knew it. If they stayed, they would all die. But the moment the command was given, something far worse happened. The Terran warship moved. It had been still this entire time, allowing them to struggle, allowing them to witness the hopelessness of their situation. But now it glided forward, closing the distance with an unsettling grace. And as it moved, for the first time, the Zorath fleet detected something. A transmission. A single message sent directly to every Zorath ship. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a threat. It was worse. Run. The voice was calm, human, almost amused. And with that single word, the last remnants of Zorath arrogance shattered. Officers who had once laughed at the idea of human warships now trembled at their stations. Some began sending out distress signals. Others tried to flee before the Admiral's order was even completed. The mighty Zorath fleet, feared across the galaxy, was now a scattering swarm of terrified ships, each trying to escape the unstoppable force before them. But it was too late. The hunt had already begun. The Zorath fleet scattered like insects, their once mighty formation collapsing into pure chaos. Officers screamed conflicting orders as ships broke rank, each vessel trying to outrun the inevitable. But the Terran warship had no intention of letting them go so easily. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding through the battlefield like a predator among helpless prey. Where Zorath ships once moved with confidence, now they stumbled, desperate to escape. But escape was an illusion. The moment the first Zorath ship tried to jump into hyperspace, it was met with a horrifying reality. Its engines failed instantly. One by one, every ship attempting to flee suffered the same fate. Some tried activating emergency warp drives, but those too were disabled in an instant. It was as if the very fabric of space itself had turned against them. Panic turned into despair. They were trapped. And then the real slaughter began. The Terran warship, still eerily silent, continued its grim work. It did not fire in random bursts like a panicked enemy, nor did it unleash an overwhelming barrage like a force eager to end things quickly. Instead, it hunted with methodical precision. A single shot, one ship gone. A second shot, another erased. The destruction was almost surgical, as if the ship was dissecting the Zoreth fleet, piece by piece, for some unseen purpose. Admiral Korvac stood frozen at his command station, his claws digging into the metal railing as he watched his fleet, his legacy, be torn apart. He had been in countless battles, had led entire campaigns of conquest, but never had he felt such utter helplessness. He could hear his officers breaking down around him, some sobbing, some praying, some simply staring in blank horror. What are they? One of his officers whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Korvac had no answer. The reports had spoken of Terran warships before, but nothing like this. Nothing capable of defying every known law of warfare. No matter how advanced the Zoreth were, no matter how much firepower they had, none of it mattered. The humans had something more, something terrifying. And worst of all, they had not even spoken. No demands, no negotiations, no threats, only that one chilling word, run. And they had. But there was nowhere left to run. The Zoreth ships were reduced to embers, flickering and dying in the cold void of space. The fleet, once the pride of their empire, was now nothing more than a graveyard. And as the last Zoreth battleship vanished into oblivion, Admiral Korvac finally understood. This was not just a warship. It was a message, a warning to the entire galaxy. The humans had arrived, and there would be no mercy. The silence that followed was suffocating. The battlefield, once filled with the screams of dying ships and the desperate cries of officers, had gone eerily still. The wreckage of the once mighty Zoreth fleet floated lifelessly, twisted metal and shattered hulls, drifting through the void like forgotten relics of a failed empire. Fires still burned on some of the ruined vessels, small patches of orange and red struggling against the endless blackness of space. Among the debris, the lone Terran warship remained, untouched, unmoving, and undeniably victorious. It had not suffered so much as a scratch. It had taken apart an entire armada without even exerting itself. And now it simply lingered, as if waiting, watching. But for what? No one knew. The surviving Zoreth officers aboard the last few functional ships stared at their screens in disbelief. Their fleet had been wiped out, their defenses shredded like paper, and their weapons had been proven utterly useless. There was nothing left to fight with, nothing left to defend themselves. Some commanders suggested surrender, others urged a final, suicidal charge. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Neither option would matter. The humans had already decided their fate. They had chosen silence over diplomacy, destruction over negotiation. And so the last remaining Zoreth ships simply drifted in place, powerless and broken, waiting for the end. But it never came. Without warning, the Terran warship moved again, its dark hull gliding through the wreckage like a ghost. For a brief moment, the surviving Zoreth officers braced for another attack, expecting their annihilation to come at any second. But instead, the warship simply turned away. It did not fire a final shot. It did not pursue the stragglers. It did not even acknowledge the survivors. It just left. It vanished into the darkness as effortlessly as it had appeared, its presence lingering like a nightmare that refused to fade. And in that moment, the surviving Zoreth officers felt something worse than fear. They felt humiliation. The humans had not even considered them worthy of finishing off. They were not an enemy. They were nothing. A message flashed across the remaining Zoreth ships, sent from the flagship's shattered remains. A simple distress call to the rest of the Empire. But the Zoreth officers hesitated before sending it. What would they even say? How could they explain what had happened? That a single Terran warship had dismantled their fleet without effort. That their weapons had been useless. That they had been spared not out of mercy, but because they weren't even worth killing. They had no answers. Only one thing was certain. The galaxy would learn of this battle. And when it did, everything would change. The Zorath were no longer the apex predators of the cosmos. The humans had arrived. And the era of Zorath dominance was over. The silence that followed was suffocating. The battlefield, once filled with the screams of dying ships and the desperate cries of officers, had gone eerily still. The wreckage of the once mighty Zorath fleet floated lifelessly, twisted metal and shattered hulls drifting through the void like forgotten relics of a failed empire. Fires still burned on some of the ruined vessels, small patches of orange and red struggling against the endless blackness of space. Among the debris, the lone Terran warship remained, untouched, unmoving, and undeniably victorious. It had not suffered so much as a scratch. It had taken apart an entire armada without even exerting itself. And now it simply lingered, as if waiting, watching. But for what? No one knew. The surviving Zorath officers aboard the last few functional ships stared at their screens in disbelief. Their fleet had been wiped out, their defenses shredded like paper, and their weapons had been proven utterly useless. There was nothing left to fight with, nothing left to defend themselves. Some commanders suggested surrender, others urged a final, suicidal charge. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Neither option would matter. The humans had already decided their fate. They had chosen silence over diplomacy, destruction over negotiation, and so the last remaining Zorath ships simply drifted in place, powerless and broken, waiting for the end. But it never came. Without warning, the Terran warship moved again, its dark hull gliding through the wreckage like a ghost. For a brief moment, the surviving Zorath officers braced for another attack, expecting their annihilation to come at any second. But instead, the warship simply turned away. It did not fire a final shot. It did not pursue the stragglers. It did not even acknowledge the survivors. It just left. It vanished into the darkness as effortlessly as it had appeared, its presence lingering like a nightmare that refused to fade. And in that moment, the surviving Zorath officers felt something worse than fear. They felt humiliation. The humans had not even considered them worthy of finishing off. They were not an enemy. They were nothing. A message flashed across the remaining Zorath ships, sent from the flagship's shattered remains, a simple distress call to the rest of the Empire. But the Zorath officers hesitated before sending it. What would they even say? How could they explain what had happened? That a single Terran warship had dismantled their fleet without effort. That their weapons had been useless. That they had been spared not out of mercy, but because they weren't even worth killing. They had no answers. Only one thing was certain. The galaxy would learn of this battle. And when it did, everything would change. The Zorath were no longer the apex predators of the cosmos. The humans had arrived. And the era of Zorath dominance was over. Fears spread across the galaxy like a storm, creeping into the hearts of even the most powerful species. The Zorath Empire, once unchallenged in its military might, found itself paralyzed by uncertainty. Reports of the Terran warship's battle were analyzed, dissected, and reviewed in every war room, intelligence chamber, and ruling council. No one could explain how the ship had withstood an entire armada's assault without sustaining damage, how it had moved with impossible precision, or how its weapons had cut through Zorath defenses like they were made of paper. Theories ranged from classified human technology to something far more terrifying, an external force aiding them, something beyond known science. Whispers of ancient cosmic entities and lost precursor civilizations resurfaced, fueling paranoia. Some factions within the Zorath hierarchy pushed for immediate retaliation, demanding the destruction of Earth before humanity could deploy more such warships. But the High Command hesitated. If this was merely one ship, How many more could there be? If the humans had hidden this level of technology, what else were they keeping secret? An emergency council of war was held in the grand chambers of the Zorath High Command, where the ruling warlords debated their course of action. Some advocated for a cautious approach, spies, infiltrators, and diplomatic negotiations to gauge humanity's full strength. Others, more blinded by arrogance and fear, refused to believe a single ship could change the course of the galaxy. They demanded a show of force, a second fleet, stronger and more prepared, to seek out and destroy the Terran vessel. Yet beneath the surface of their arguments, one undeniable truth loomed over them. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage in the most terrifying way possible, and whether the Zorath chose diplomacy or war, they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The Zorath Empire mobilized its largest fleet yet, determined to erase the humiliation it had suffered. Hundreds of battleships, dreadnoughts, and war carriers assembled in the void, each vessel armed with the most advanced weaponry their empire had ever produced. The galaxy watched with bated breath as the armada prepared to strike, each species wondering if this would be the moment humanity was crushed, or if the impossible would happen once again. The Terran warship, which had already defied expectations, had become more than just a vessel. It was now a legend, a ghost in the darkness that no one truly understood. As the Zorath fleet advanced, their commanders remained confident, believing that sheer overwhelming firepower would be enough. They had studied the previous battle, adjusted their strategies, and modified their weapons to counter the unknown defenses of the human warship. But as they entered the system where the ship had last been sighted, they found nothing. No signals, no movement, just the vast emptiness of space. Confusion spread through their ranks. Scanners were maxed out, every sensor array working at full capacity, but there was nothing. Then, without warning, the darkness itself came alive. From the void, the Terran warship emerged, not alone, but accompanied by more vessels, sleek, unknown ships that had never been detected before. They had been waiting. The Zorath fleet, expecting the simple retaliation, was now facing something far worse. A trap. Before they could react, space itself became their enemy. The human ships moved in ways that defied logic, weaving through the battlefield with impossible speed and precision. Energy beams sliced through shields as if they were non-existent. Torpedoes detonated with devastating force, and Zorath warships were torn apart before they even had a chance to fire. Panic set in as commanders screamed orders, but it was futile. The humans were not just winning. They were dismantling the Zorath fleet with cold, calculated efficiency. And in the final moments of the battle, as the last surviving Zorath ships tried to flee, a single message was broadcast to every remaining vessel, a warning, spoken in flawless Zorath dialect. You started this war. Now you will learn what it means to fear. The remnants of the once mighty Zorath fleet scattered in all directions, their formations shattered, their discipline broken. What had begun as an overwhelming show of force had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. Fires raged across crippled warships, escape pods jettisoned into the void, and distress signals screamed into the vastness of space. But there would be no mercy. The Terran warships, once dismissed as insignificant, moved like predators through the wreckage, eliminating any vessel that dared to resist. It was not a battle anymore. It was an execution. The Zorath's supreme commander, bloodied and frantic, shouted orders to retreat, but there was nowhere left to run. Their strongest fleet had been reduced to debris in mere hours. His screens flickered with images of destruction, and then, as if the universe itself was mocking them, the main display went dark. A single, ominous transmission replaced all other signals, a message from the Terrans. The human captain, unseen but undeniable, spoke with an icy calm that sent fear through every remaining Zorath officer. This war ends today. Your empire will remember this moment for eternity. And then one final strike, a single precise shot from the Terran flagship. The Supreme Commander barely had time to process it before his ship was consumed by fire, ripped apart in an explosion that sent shockwaves through the system. The Zorath Empire, once unchallenged, now faced the unthinkable. The Terrans had not just won. They had made a statement, one that would echo across the stars for generations. And as the last Terran warship vanished into the darkness, leaving only silence in its wake, the galaxy understood one undeniable truth. Humanity had arrived, and they were not to be underestimated ever again. The aftermath of the battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. News of the Terran fleet's victory traveled faster than light, reaching the ears of empires, warlords, and rulers who had once viewed humanity as insignificant. The Zorath Empire, once the greatest military force in the known universe, had been utterly humiliated. Their strongest fleet, their pride, their symbol of power, had been obliterated by what they once called primitive upstarts. The political landscape shifted overnight. Allies of the Zorath began to rethink their loyalties, wondering if their partnership with a broken empire was worth the risk. Opponents of humanity hesitated, realizing that to challenge them would mean facing the same annihilation. Fear gripped those who had mocked the Terrans. Those who had secretly plotted against them now scrambled to erase any trace of their hostility, desperate to avoid becoming the next example of human wrath. Meanwhile, the Terran fleet did not linger. They did not demand surrender or tribute. They simply left, disappearing into the void like ghosts, their silence even more terrifying than their fury. The message was clear. Humanity did not seek conquest, only respect. And if that respect was denied, they would take it by force. Across the galaxy, leaders gathered in secret meetings, their voices hushed with fear and uncertainty. Some called for immediate alliances with the Terrans, while others, blinded by arrogance, sought revenge. But deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity was no longer just another species. They were a force that could not be ignored, a storm that could not be stopped. And in the cold depths of space, where whispers of war and vengeance brewed, the Terrans watched, waiting, ready. Whispers turned into desperate conversations across the ruling chambers of countless empires. The destruction of the Zorath fleet had shattered the balance of power in the galaxy, and now every ruler, every warlord, every admiral had the same question on their minds. What would humanity do next? The silence of the Terran fleet was unnerving. They had struck with precision, wiped out the strongest fleet the Zorath had ever assembled, and then vanished into the void without a single demand. No conquest, no declaration of war, no demands for territory or tribute. It was as if they had simply wanted to make a point, a warning that could not be ignored. The Zorath High Council was in chaos. Once the rulers of the most feared military force in the galaxy, they now sat in their war chambers, arguing over their next move. Some wanted to retaliate, calling for the construction of a new armada, one larger than before. Others, those who understood the depth of their failure, insisted on seeking peace before it was too late. But deep inside, they all knew the truth. No fleet, no strategy, no amount of resources could guarantee victory against the Terrans. The battle had proved that. Their technology, their tactics, their understanding of war itself had been outmatched in every way. And the galaxy had witnessed it. Other empires, those who had once trembled before the might of the Zorath, now hesitated to follow their lead. A growing number of them were secretly reaching out to the humans, seeking alliances, treaties, anything that would ensure they did not suffer the same fate. In the shadows, rogue factions and warlords whispered of rebellion, sensing weakness in the once invincible Zorath rule. Some saw the Terrans as saviors, others as harbingers of destruction. And while the galaxy trembled with uncertainty, the humans remained silent, watching, observing, waiting. For the first time in history, the galaxy did not know what to expect. And that uncertainty was more terrifying than any war. The silence of the Terrans was not just unsettling, it was suffocating. The Zorath, once the undisputed rulers of military dominance, now found themselves trapped in a cage of their own making. Their enemies sensed weakness, their allies hesitated, and their own citizens whispered in fear. Every council meeting was filled with heated arguments, desperate attempts to salvage what remained of their fractured empire. Some still clung to the old ways, calling for another show of strength, a grander fleet, a renewed campaign to remind the galaxy of the Zorath's rightful place. But even the most ambitious warlords hesitated when they remembered the battle, the way their greatest fleet had been erased, as if it had never existed. No one wanted to be the next fool who sent thousands of ships into oblivion. Spies were sent to uncover humanity's intentions, but they returned with nothing. The Terrans had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving behind only silence and fear. No threats, no ultimatums, no demands. And yet, the galaxy could feel their presence, as if their unseen eyes were watching from the darkness, waiting for the next move. This uncertainty was worse than open war. Every empire had begun making quiet adjustments, reinforcing their borders, shifting their alliances, preparing for possibilities they could not predict. Some tried to make contact with the humans, offering peace, trade, anything that would keep them safe. Others plotted in secret, hoping to learn from the Terrans, to uncover the secret behind their impossible victory. But in the end, it was all just a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The Zorath knew it, their enemies knew it, and deep down, the entire galaxy knew it. The balance of power had shifted, and there was no turning back. Humanity had proven they were not to be underestimated, and now, as the galaxy held its breath, everyone knew one undeniable truth. When the Terrans finally spoke, the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The galaxy remained in uneasy silence, waiting for the Terrans to make their next move. Fear had seeped into every empire, every council, every warlord's heart. The Zorath, once the greatest military force in the known universe, were now nothing more than a fractured remnant of their former glory. Their fleets had been decimated, their confidence shattered, and their reputation reduced to whispers of a past that no longer held meaning. Yet the humans had not pressed their advantage, had not declared dominion over the fallen empire, had not demanded tributes or sworn fealty. Instead, they had simply disappeared. The void where their warship had once stood remained an open wound in the minds of every strategist, every admiral, every leader. What did it mean? Were they biding their time? Were they watching from the darkness, waiting for another act of aggression? Or had they already deemed the galaxy unworthy of further interaction? These unanswered questions kept the most powerful beings in the universe awake at night. The uncertainty was unbearable. Some sought diplomacy, desperate to open communication with humanity, but their messages vanished into the void without a reply. Others, still clinging to arrogance, tried to prepare new weapons, to find a way to counter the impossible technology that had erased entire fleets in an instant. But the scientists and engineers who studied the wreckage of the fallen Zorath ships found only one undeniable truth: there was nothing left to learn. The Terran warship had not fought a battle. It had not clashed in glorious combat. It had simply ended the engagement as if it had never been. This was not a war that could be won with tactics or strategy. This was not an enemy that could be outmaneuvered or outgunned. The realization was suffocating. Some empires surrendered before a single battle was fought, declaring loyalty to the unknown force that had humbled the Zorath. Others fell into chaos, their people unwilling to follow leaders who had proven powerless against this unseen force. And still, humanity remained silent. No fleets emerged, no threats were made, no claims of victory were declared. But the galaxy understood. The war had already been decided. The rulers of the stars had changed, and the Terrans had taken their place at the top, not by conquest, not by force, but by demonstrating a power so absolute that no one dared challenge it. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, and the rest of existence could do nothing but wait and wonder what the Terrans would choose to do next.